Okay, we have made it to our last panel of the day. Thank all of you for being here, and this has been a tremendous day where we've gotten to cover a lot of really great and important issues. This last issue is another very important issue. We're going to talk about religious freedom on this last panel today. To talk to us about that, we have Raul Labrador here today. Congressman Labrador represents a new generation of conservative leaders. You know, he's been conservative through and through since he got here. He does not bend. He fights for principle. And he is, I think, one of our most talented, young, up-and-coming communicators in the House of Representatives. And for that, he's been the subject of much speculation and much whispers as to his future in this town. And I think that those speculative whispers are well-deserved. Today, he'll talk to us about religious freedom. Like so many of the topics we've talked about today, this is an issue which the federal government is overreaching in very chilling and scary ways. It's an issue that cuts across the partisan divide and gets to the very core of the fight we face right now against a callous and indifferent federal government that seeks to impose its worldview on its citizens. Raul Labrador has done great work in this issue area and continues to make a name for himself in other areas as well. For example, he's leading an effort right now on prison sentencing reform. And this work is attracting a lot of strange bedfellows, libertarians, conservatives, liberals, all coming together around this issue. So he does these kinds of things, and he actually confounds a lot of the labelers out there, which I think is a very refreshing thing. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Labrador to the stage.
Thank you for your kind words. Good afternoon. It's great to be here. I'm going to be really brief, and then we're going to sit and have a panel. But let me start by just thanking Heritage for doing this terrific summit. My staff, I've been flying most of the day, so I haven't heard most of it. But my staff has been listening to it all day, and they've given me some amazing reports. I appreciate the opportunity to be part of this distinguished panel and talking about and sharing ideas about what I believe will be one of the most important issues, I think, in the next few years. And that issue is religious liberty and the growing threats to our religious liberty. Regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum, I think we can all agree that the freedom of religion is one of our foundational values. And yet, like many of you, I am deeply concerned that this administration may begin to use the federal government to discriminate against individuals and organizations who believe traditional marriage and believe in it for religious reasons. The administration already has a history of imposing their ideas on religious and faith-based institutions. We all know about the HHS mandate on contraception, in which the administration is forcing religious and other faith-based organizations to spend money on things like abortion pills that violate their most basic beliefs. We also remember how the IRS targeted conservative and Tea Party groups and trying to take away their nonprofit status as part of a coordinated agenda. We also remember, and we should not assume that the IRS will be any friendlier to organizations that support and want to continue practicing traditional marriage. In fact, we've already seen a lot of things happen at the state level. Things are already moving in the wrong direction. Last August, the New Mexico Supreme Court ruled that a Christian photographer violated state law by refusing to photograph a same-sex commitment ceremony, even though doing so would have violated the photographer's deeply held religious beliefs. Other cases involve Christian adoption and foster care agencies. And in fact, in California, there was a bill making its way through the legislature that would have removed from the Boy Scouts of America certain state-level tax exemptions and threaten similar groups who hold traditional views about marriage and sexual morality. It passed in the California Senate by a vote of 27-9 before being tabled in the state assembly. Such policies are creating a climate of intolerance and intimidation for citizens who believe that marriage is the union of one man and one woman. And this climate could escalate to the federal level. And that's why I introduced H.R. 3133, the Marriage and Religious Freedom Act, which will protect freedom of conscience on the issue of marriage. My bill is really narrow. It's narrowly tailored to prohibit the federal government from inappropriately targeting organizations or individuals who hold the religious belief that marriage is the union of one man and one woman. H.R. 3133 prohibits the federal government from making tax-exempt status contingent on a group's beliefs about marriage. No group should be denied or lose tax exemption because it has a religious belief that marriage is the union of a man and a woman, or that sexual relations are reserved for marriage. My bill would also ensure that the federal government cannot deny or exclude a person from receiving any federal grant, contract, loans, license, certification, accreditation, employment, or other similar position or status. Tax-exempt status isn't just for those groups who win the favor of a particular government institution or administration. While Americans are civilly free to structure their personal relationships as state law permits, they should not use government to penalize those who think and act differently. Protecting religious liberty and the rights of conscience does not infringe on anyone's freedoms. All Americans should be free to believe and act in the public square based on their beliefs about marriage without fear of any government penalty. All people should be treated with dignity and respect. That includes not using the law to coerce and penalize those who seek to follow their conscience. H.R. 3133 currently has 100 co-sponsors and has been referred to the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, plus the House Ways and Means Committee. I'm very excited to have 5 of the 6 Ways and Means Subcommittee Chairmen and 4 of the 5 Oversight and Government Reform Subcommittee Chairmen as co-sponsors. To be clear, our bill doesn't take anything away from anyone. All it does is it protects the religious freedom of those who believe marriage is the union of one man and one woman. This is a great bill that social conservatives and libertarians can rally around, that can generate support in both parties, and that can actually pass both houses of Congress and become law. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman. We appreciate those remarks very much. I would now like to invite the rest of our panel to come up. Austin Nimick serves as Senior Legal Counsel with Alliance Defending Freedom, and he is the Director of Legal Advocacy for Marriage and Family there. We also will have Sarah Torrey joining us. Sarah is our lead policy analyst on this in the DeVos Center for Religious and Civil Society here at the Heritage Foundation. I think I'll kick it off with a question or two, and then we'll open it up to everybody. Austin, we saw the Supreme Court strike down part of the Federal Defense of Marriage Act last summer. How has the federal government used that decision, and why should Congress move to protect religious liberty now?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, the administration we've seen since the Windsor decision came down last June has used it in a way that the Supreme Court actually expressly condemned the federal government for acting when DOMA was enacted. Specifically, when you read the opinion, you'll see that the Supreme Court condemned Congress for putting its thumb on the scales and influencing how states would choose to conduct their own marriage policy. And now we see the federal government, since the enactment of the Windsor decision, enacting through soft law at various administrative levels what we call a place of celebration rule with regard to marriages, saying that if you have a marriage license from one jurisdiction, we're going to honor it in any jurisdiction in which you exist, including jurisdictions that don't recognize same-sex marriage. So if the Supreme Court was right that Congress put its thumb on the states to influence them not to enact same-sex marriage, now this administration is putting its thumb on the states and using the opinion to coerce states to enact same-sex marriage, or to create what the Supreme Court also called two regimes of marriage law in any given state. So now you have, for example, if you have a state that does not honor same-sex marriage like Missouri, and you have a same-sex couple that has a marriage license from New York, they will receive federal benefits but not state benefits, thereby having the two-tiered scheme that the Supreme Court expressly condemned. Of course, this also has implications for religious liberty, because we've seen where same-sex marriage has taken root, it has animated non-discrimination laws in respective states with regard to sexual orientation and marital status. And so, we are litigating a lot of those cases that exist in both same-sex marriage and non-same-sex marriage states, and exactly the full breadth of that impact remains to be seen, and it will continue to be played out.
Thank you. I think I'd like to, the Congressman may have to jet a little bit early here, so I'd like to direct a question to you before you think of. You mentioned you have 100 co-sponsors. What's it going to take to get this on the floor this year?
You know, we have been working very hard with the chairman of both committees, and that's one of the reasons that we worked hard to get the chairman of the subcommittees to be co-sponsors. And I think as we keep getting more and more people ready to support this legislation, I think we're going to be able to have hearings on that. And it's something that I think both parties can agree to, is because we're not trying to discriminate in any way. We're not trying to change the Windsor decision. My legislation is very narrowly tailored. And I spent a lot of time writing it because I wanted to make sure that we were not trying to overturn Windsor in any way. And some people might want to do that. But what this legislation does is it just tells the American people that if they have a deeply held religious belief on marriage, that they're not going to be discriminated against by the federal government. And I think it's just a pretty simple legislation that the American people can get
Do you
behind.
have some Democrats in mind that are ready to support this?
We actually have a couple of Democrats that are already co-sponsors of the legislation, and we have several who said they would support it when it comes to the House floor.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, for Sarah. Sarah, what are some of the ways that the redefinition of marriage has threatened Americans' religious liberty?
Sure. So as Austin mentioned, we've had a number of instances, unfortunately, in states where the redefinition of marriage, especially coupled with sexual orientation laws and non-discrimination policies, have combined to threaten people's religious freedom. So ADF is actually leading the charge in one case of Elaine Photography. This is a photographer in New Mexico, excuse me, that she declined to use her artistic abilities to take photographs of a same-sex ceremony because that violated her religious beliefs. Unfortunately, a commission and eventually the New Mexico Supreme Court there ruled that she was violating non-discrimination policies in that state, and they've now appealed that case to the Supreme Court. And I might ask Austin to add anything since it's your case.
Well, the Supreme Court should grant cert. That's what I'll add. So, yeah, we have a reply brief due later this month on that, and we'll find out in a matter of months whether cert is granted.
Great. Let's open it up to questions. Yes, sir. We got a mic coming down right now.
This question can be for any of the panel. How do you respond to those who say that discrimination against gay people is the same as discrimination against African Americans, sort of like Loving v. Virginia for sexual orientation?
That's a great question. What this bill does specifically is it says you can believe whatever you want on same-sex marriage, but the government's not going to take away your tax-exempt status. For example, when I give money to my church is not going to be penalized by the federal government because they believe in traditional marriage, and I'm not going to have my tax deduction taken away from me because I believe in traditional marriage. I'm not forcing my views on anybody else. I'm just trying to make sure that my views are protected like they're enshrined in the Constitution.
Yeah, and I have two responses to that question. Number one, there's a massive distinction, and I think the congressman just animated it, in acting because of a deeply held belief about marriage on the one hand, and acting because you don't like somebody who defines themselves as gay or lesbian on the other hand. And so when you look at the cases we're litigating, so we talked about Elaine Photography, and it was clear in that case and that she had served gays and lesbians and would photograph gays and lesbians, but then she was being asked to participate in a same-sex ceremony which ran contrary to her deeply held religious beliefs. And so that case brought forward factually the clear distinction. You may have heard about our florist in the state of Washington who was asked to provide flowers for two men who have been longtime friends and clients of hers, who she's been serving and providing flowers for a long time. They were friends. They hugged. They know each other. But when it came to, we want you to participate in and celebrate in Our ceremony, that's where she respectfully drew the line, and when it happened, they actually gave each other a hug, and he walked off and seemed fine, and then the next thing you know, she's slapped with a lawsuit, and the attorney generals are after her. There's a very clear distinction between those two events, and I think it's borne out in the facts, and I think we need to, if we're really going to understand this issue and talk about tolerance and having a pluralistic society and understanding the different beliefs and where we all intersect, we need to understand those differences. And the second response I have is it really brings to forefront the purpose of non-discrimination laws. Why do we have them? In all of the cases that we have, what's fascinating about they have one common thread, and the common thread is this. In each instance, the same-sex couple or gay or lesbian at issue got what they wanted. The same-sex couple got photography services. They actually got photography services for less money. In the florist case, they got flowers. Our T-shirt printer in the state of Kentucky, actually the gay and lesbian pride parade folks actually end up getting their T-shirts for free. Our client did them a favor by refusing the business. Everybody gets what they want and then turn around and go after the people with religious beliefs. That's not why we have non-discrimination laws. The purpose of the non-discrimination laws is to help secure the marketplace for people. And when there are people falling all over themselves, to help out those, regardless of what religious beliefs may be, is it necessary for us to actually go after and persecute the people who hold deeply held religious beliefs? And when you see that common thread in all the cases, that everybody's getting what they need, the question of why do we need to persecute those who have deeply held religious beliefs becomes a serious one, and I think really animates why Congressman Labrador's bill is so important. Great question.
Yes, Jerry.
In those instances, it sounds as if there are no damages suffered.
There are no damages suffered by those who were refused service for those reasons, right? They found what they wanted elsewhere. So what's their, what's the claim?
Well, the way the laws are is that they're very strict. If you refuse service, you can't refuse services for this reason, and if you do, you are liable. They're not contingent upon whether you found services elsewhere or anything along those lines. But there are damages. I want to be very clear. There are damages. I think when you violate somebody's constitutional rights and you take away their free exercise rights and their speech rights, which is what's happening to our clients, that is damaging. It may not be on the side that our opponents think that the damages are on, but I think that there are damages and consequences associated with these conflicts. The business is damaged. That's exactly right. And so what you're ultimately pitting, in our cases, what you're pitting against is the hassle of having to make another phone call or do another internet search versus a constitutional right. Or arguably a constitutional right versus a state non-discrimination law, assuming that there's a prima facie case of discrimination. In either circumstance, and I realize I'm biased because I represent them, but I think our client should win because that free exercise of religion and that right of free speech is most important, especially when you do have a free marketplace and those who are petitioning for services are able to find what they want. And that's the story that nobody wants to talk about in the media and whatnot about all these cases. It portrays the same-sex couples as victims, and that just hasn't been the case in all the way all these things have happened.
Yes, sir. Right here.
I'm a pastor from across the Potomac in Virginia, and I'm curious to understand Virginia as a commonwealth. We have what we call an unincorporated association. As a matter of fact, Eric Stanley helped us with one of our cases on discrimination for a school for children with disabilities. So am I understanding that because I believe that God creates life in his image, male and female, at conception, somehow I could lose a tax benefit to contributors?
That's
Go ahead,
actually what
Congressman.
this law is trying to prevent. Some of the examples that were given here earlier, this particular bill does not address. Those are more state-based complaints, and there are some state legislatures. In fact, my state of Idaho is trying to pass state legislation that would fix those issues. But what I'm trying to prevent is exactly your example, that just because you believe that God created man and woman and created a certain traditional marriage ceremony, that you're not going to have your tax-exempt status taken away from you, or your contributors are not going to have their tax-exempt status, their tax contributions denied. And, people a few years ago kept saying, how is that possible? That would never happen. But when you look at what the IRS has been doing when it comes to Tea Party groups that they clearly disagreed with this administration disagreed with the Tea Party groups and other conservative groups' ideology and agenda, they not only tried to deny them, but they made them jump through so many hoops to get their tax-exempt status. And it should frighten all of us that this administration would be willing to go that far. And when I have talked to people actually in Congress, some people say, well, why shouldn't we be able to take away their tax-exempt status if they believe in traditional marriage, which is quite chilling, and is quite contrary to the Constitution, our founding principles.
Oh, right here.
In 2003, I took photographs that Human Events published, a pictorial essay called God and the Temples of Government. My images then played in the amicus brief of Van Orden versus Perry. And I went one step further to begin to promote my images, and I was asked for a mission statement. And I said, well, after great thought, the freedom of artistic expression, which is something the young lady on the panel addressed. And back then, I took a picture of the Jose Artuego down on in Constitution Avenue, who the frog on his boots is shaped like a cross. And I pointed to that example saying, someone will come along one day and say, take that off, because it looks like a cross and it offends me. And I've been watching the pattern of more of these examples happening globally. So it's a broader conversation, but included in that is the faith artist who wants to draw a Jesus. And I tell people that you may be the faith artist arguing against it, but someone who draws a dog can then have someone come along and say, dogs offend me. Where does it stop?
It's a really good point. It reminds me of one of the cases that we have where we represented a British Airways flight attendant who was not allowed to wear a simple cross necklace because somebody may be offended by that, and it just brings the notion, the ideas of tolerance and diversity, even in the workplace, that somebody can't wear a cross necklace without being persecuted. And unfortunately, we were able to get a victory for that young lady with the European Court of Human Rights. So that was nice.
And I think in a number of these circumstances, and especially in the HHS mandate that the congressman alluded to, you see this watering down of religious freedom to just a freedom of worship, right? Faith is something that you keep in your home, in your house of worship. It's not something that you bring to your workplace. But that's not a correct understanding of religious freedom. That's not what our founders envisioned. Our founders envisioned the ability to go into business, to create jobs, to grow the economy, and to do so in accordance with your values. So in a number of religious freedom cases, whether you're talking about in the marriage debate or elsewhere, we have a fundamental misunderstanding of religious freedom going on.
Well, I have to go back to Congress, but thank you very much. They can continue to speak, and
Thank
have a
you for
wonderful
coming.
day.
We have time for a few more questions. Yes, sir, right here in the middle.
For the cases that you have, nothing is so chilling to me too. I'm sure you can answer this question. Assuming you win, who pays for all that?
The question is, assuming you win your cases, who pays for all that for the people watching online?
Well, and obviously the cases, some cases we're defending, and some cases we're prosecuting. The wedding photographer from New Mexico, we're defending her, and this case is being prosecuted by the New Mexico Human Rights Commission, I believe, and has gone through, I think we're now at our 5th tribunal with the United States Supreme Court, if I'm recalling correctly. Yes, that's right. 5th tribunal over the course of, I think, 6 years. And who's paying for that? Who's paying for the 6-year persecution against a young lady who just wants to photograph images who are pleasing to God when the same-sex couple got photographs? Well, you're paying for it. The taxpayers of New Mexico are paying for it, and by and large, that's exactly how these cases are going. And this, I mentioned our T-shirt manufacturer in Kentucky, or T-shirt printer in Kentucky, same dynamic. We're at the administrative level. This thing has been going now nearly 2 years, and we're still on the administrative level. It keeps going the same path. It's going to be another 6 or 7 years with that case, and the taxpayers of Kentucky are going to fund that. Even though the group, they got their T-shirts, they got them for free, the event's over with. I mean, life has moved on, and we've got years of litigation at the expense of Kentucky taxpayers look likely ahead of us. So it's really unfortunate.
Yes, sir. Right here.
Austin, every year I walk on the church property and behind that holy desk, and I do not give up my First Amendment rights. So I tape and DVD and send the notes of my sermon to the IRS as a part of the ADF Speak Up. I think 3,000 churches, is that correct, have participated, and how many have lost their tax-exempt status?
Not one church in the history of the United States has ever lost its tax-exempt status, period, paragraph, no exceptions, not one. It's never happened. And that's why we're trying to pick a fight with the IRS to get the what the pastor's alluding to is the 1954 Johnson Amendment, which tries to take part of the voice of the church away, and that pastors cannot preach salt and light from the pulpit when it comes to elections or the values of candidates and whatnot. And so we've been having pastors, thousands of pastors across the country now, give pulpit freedom sermons and send those sermons to the IRS with a letter that says, look at my violation of the law, please come get me. They haven't come and gotten them yet, so we're hoping we're going to get that into federal court sooner or later. And it's a very important movement to maintain freedom of speech, freedom of worship, and the freedom of the church, because if the government can control any aspect of the church, it can control all the church. And then that really flies into the face of the idea of separation of church and state.
The Archbishop of Chicago famously said a few years ago, he said, I expect to die in my bed, I expect my successor to die in prison, and I expect his successor to die a martyr in the public square. I mean, that is a feeling that's running through a lot of faith communities. So it's more than just, religious freedom on marriage. It's attacks on religious freedom across the board. I wonder if you guys could talk a little bit about some of the other attacks on religious freedom that we see cropping up on the horizon out there.
So I think one of the largest one is the HHS mandate, right? This is the Obamacare rule that forces employers to provide coverage of abortion-inducing drugs and contraception in their health plans, regardless of whether or not they have a religious or moral objection to those drugs and services. And if you don't get in line, as with most of Obamacare, you get fined heavily. It's $100 per employee per day if you're not in compliance, $2,000 a year if you just drop health care coverage altogether, which most employers don't want to do. And in addition to preventing, job-creating companies, you have Hobby Lobby, Conestoga Wood, which are at the Supreme Court level, that are creating jobs, really growing the economy, in addition to hampering their ability to do that by restricting their freedom to do that in accordance with their values. You're also hampering a whole host of civil society organizations. You have the Little Sisters of the Poor, that these are nuns who take a vow of poverty and help elderly poor across the world. These women can't do that work in accordance with their belief under this mandate. So back to what I was saying earlier, the incredible diminution of religious freedom under this administration to just a mere freedom of worship. This is solely within your formal houses of worship in your home. If you step outside to serve your fellow man, to create jobs, to provide goods and services, your religious freedom ends. But that's not what our founders envisioned. That's not what the Constitution, rightly understood, protects. And that it's a very concerning. Hopefully, this is also at the Supreme Court, so hopefully that mandate is struck down and we have a better recognition and protection of religious freedom.
Thank you. Others? Yes, sir.
I'm just wondering, have you found any instances of pastors or other faith community individuals being targeted by the IRS for audits for personal taxes? Like we've seen with the Tea Party groups, has that started to bleed over into religious communities?
There have been some churches that have received some letters from the IRS and undergone some audits for being accused of engaging in political activity. I don't believe that any of those circumstances have resulted in any type of punitive circumstance. I also know that there was a congressional investigation into some, I think, television ministries at one point in time a couple years ago. That may actually still be going on for all I know. But I am not aware of any type of IRS targeting personally pastors or ministry leaders for anything that they may or may not be doing. Of course, just because I don't know about it doesn't mean it's not happening. And it could start tomorrow for all I know, but I'm not aware of anything to this point.
We got one more in the back.
About a week ago, Microsoft acquired Foursquare or bought the data from Foursquare from $15 million, and designers are now finding that they're being tracked to gain studies. I would offer that with the invasiveness of technology into our mobiles and our homes, that we're going to be, and our emails, we're going to be tracked sooner, even on our faith issues.
Well, we know that government has a lot of levers of mechanisms and control to exert power over the people. And I think what the business of what ADF and Heritage and a lot of other allies are about is about maintaining a lot of those freedoms, and especially when it comes to religious freedom and making sure that government doesn't suffocate, in my opinion, something that made this country great at one point in time and can still do so.
One more down here.
Yeah, I served in the military for about 8 years, and when I first went in, I served in the military for about 8 years, and when I first went in, I saw lots of things, soldier's prayer, ranger's prayer, different things like that. And as I was getting out, there was a lot less of that. I saw those things scrubbed. And in the last 6 years that I've been out, I've seen fights against public crosses at memorials and things like that. So, and also the VA trying to prevent prayers at funerals. So I'm wondering what's being done. Is there anything to fight that?
Great question. As far as the military is concerned, that's an arena that has not been an exception to the what's the word I'm looking for? The pressure on religious liberty. We've had the privilege of working with and representing a lot of chaplains and chaplain endorsers in the military, and the resulting squeeze that this current administration and the Department of Defense have been putting on the free exercise of faith. And our response is very simple. We should not be denying our men and women in uniform the basic freedoms for which they are fighting and dying in many instances. And chaplains are there. The U.S. The court system is made very clear, not because they have religious freedom, but to secure the religious freedom of our men and women in uniform. We send them to remote, desolate places where they don't have access to their families and their faith communities and their home churches. The chaplains are there to make sure they can minister to them. And a lot of times when you're facing death on the battlefield, the only hope you have is God. And that's why chaplains are there, to help secure that. And when we start taking policies and actions that threaten the ability of chaplains to serve in our armed forces and minister to the men and women in uniform who we honor and love and need so much, that is one of the most basic, egregious violations of religious liberty that I can personally imagine. And I'm very glad that we have a lot of allies who are working very hard on that. Chaplain Alliance for Religious Liberty, Archdiocese for Military Services, and several others, just to name a few. So there are efforts being made, but the concern is legitimate and real.
Okay, final question right here.
Thank you both for your remarks. Tyler O'Neill with the Christian Post. My question is, I've heard a lot reporting with CP about these issues, about religious liberty and religious freedom, and how it's being assaulted in the public square. But how do you get millennials, those who are so easily riled up about, the abortion issue, about same-sex rights, about all that sort of thing, how do you get those people engaged on this issue?
I think you tell them stories. So you tell them stories about some of the HHS mandate plaintiffs. These are salt of the earth people who are doing the good work of restoring lives, of educating the next generation, of providing health care for Americans. And they're not able to do that under this rule in accordance with their beliefs, the beliefs that motivated them to go out and do that in the first place. So if you want to talk about social justice, if you want to talk about empowering the poor, about taking care of those in need, you have to let people do that in accordance with their values and not immediately penalize them through threat of government penalty if they're going to do that in accordance with their religious beliefs.
And the left has successfully won the narrative on this, right? The narrative that the left has put out there is that it's people who believe in, you know, same-sex or traditional marriage or you're religious or whatever it is. The narrative is that you are the one imposing your beliefs on everybody else. And I think we need to find a way to win the narrative, to pull back the curtain and show exactly what's happening, which is why these stories, I think, are important, because they highlight that very well.
And I think it's important to emphasize something that the congressman said, that protecting religious freedom doesn't take anything away from anyone else. This is about the government using their power to coerce people into, in the marriage context, into recognizing and affirming same-sex relationships as marriage, or using their power to force companies to provide coverage of abortion-inducing drugs or life-ending drugs and devices.
And you don't win the narrative without really smart, articulate people out there making the case, which is why we're lucky we've had these great panelists today. We've had Congressman Labrador. So thank you all for coming, and please join me in thanking the panel. We hope you can stick around. We have some drinks and appetizers out in the foyer, and thank you again for a great day and being here.